My son had his father's eyes. I told myself that was the only thing he inherited. The warmth, the laughter, the way he'd press his small hand to my cheek when I cried. I told myself that was mine. That was safe. That was human. Then the doctors showed me the scans. And I sat in that cold Denver hospital room, staring at something growing inside my child that no textbook had a name for, and I understood that I had been lying to myself for 3 years. Distance is not the same as safety. And the man I left 18 months ago, the man I never told about his son, he was never just a man. If you've ever loved something so completely that losing it didn't just break you, it rearranged you into someone you don't recognize, stay with me. Subscribe so this doesn't disappear on you. Then let me tell you what happened. The tote bag sits in the corner of room 7 like an accusation. I've been staring at it for 20 minutes. Diogo's little sneakers peeking out of the top pocket, the ones with the Velcro straps he insists on fastening himself, even when he gets them wrong, even when one flap hangs loose all afternoon, and he refuses to let me fix it because he did it himself. Mama, I did it. Those shoes. In that bag. In this room that smells like antiseptic and quiet devastation. 3 years old. My boy is 3 years old, and there are lines on a scan that the oncologist, Dr. Priya Nwosu, could not explain to me in any language I could hold on to. She had kind eyes and careful hands, and she said the words, "We've never seen cells behave this way," with the specific gentleness of someone delivering a sentence rather than a diagnosis. I already knew. I think I've known since Diogo was 6 months old. The night I found him in his crib at 2 a.m, not crying, not reaching, just lying perfectly still with his eyes open, watching the candle I'd left burning on the dresser. Not with the wide, wondering curiosity of an infant discovering light for the first time. With recognition. Like he'd seen fire before. Like some part of him remembered something that no 3-month-old body should carry. I blew the candle out and told myself I was tired. I told myself that for 3 years. My phone is in my hand. I don't remember picking it up. I have his number memorized. Not saved. Not named. Just a sequence I burned into myself the way you do, with things you know you should forget, but can't bring yourself to release. I stand at the sink in the hospital bathroom, cold water still running over my wrist, and I dial it before I can talk myself out of it. Before the version of me that spent 18 months rebuilding can talk the version of me that is a mother out of the only call that might matter. It rings once. Twice. Keisha. Just my name. Low and certain, the way he said everything, like the world around the words had already been accounted for. Like he'd been standing somewhere, perfectly still, waiting for this exact moment to arrive. My reflection in the mirror looks like a woman who has already lost. I look away from her. Dominic. My voice doesn't shake. I don't know how. You have a son. His name is Diogo. And he's dying. He comes the next morning. I don't know how. Denver to wherever he was should have taken hours, should have required logistics and advance notice and the ordinary machinery of travel. But Dominic Toretto has never operated within the constraints of the ordinary, and I knew that about him when I married him, and I knew it when I left, and I know it now as I stand in the corridor outside Diogo's room and watch him walk through the oncology ward like the building has been expecting him. The nurses look up. Not because he announces himself, he doesn't. Not because he's loud, he moves like silence given a body. They look up the way you look up when the air pressure changes before a storm. A low, instinctive alert. Something has entered the room that was not there before. He is wearing cream and gold, immaculate, unhurried, his phone still in his hand, reading something as he walks, and for one surreal moment, I wonder what a vampire king reads on his phone at 7 a.m. when he's walking toward the child he didn't know he had. Then his eyes find mine, and I stop wondering anything at all. 18 months. His face carries none of them, and all of them simultaneously. The same bone structure, the same controlled stillness, the same quality of attention that always made me feel both seen and hunted. But there are new lines around his mouth. Not age, something heavier. The kind of lines that come from decisions you don't get to unmake. He stops in front of me, looks at me for a long moment. Where is he? I push open the door. Diogo is awake. He's sitting up against the pillows, his stuffed bear tucked under one arm, watching the door with those dark, quiet eyes. He has Dominic's bone structure. I see it with new devastation now, standing beside the original. The same sharp angle softened by 3 years of childhood, the same watchful stillness in a tiny body that spends most of its time running and laughing and demanding I read the same book 4 times in a row. Dominic goes still in the doorway. Completely, absolutely still, in a way I have only ever seen him go still when something has reached past every wall he built and touched something real. Diogo tilts his head. Studies the man in the cream suit the way he studies everything he finds interesting, with that quiet, unhurried intensity that used to unnerve his daycare teachers and made my chest ache with a love I had no words for. "Hi," Diogo says. Dominic crosses to the bedside. He crouches down eye level and says something low in a language I don't recognize. Old. The cadence of it old in a way that feels like it predates the building we're standing in by centuries. His voice, always controlled, carries a fissure in it so small I almost miss it. Diogo reaches out and takes his hand. Just that. No hesitation, no suspicion. 3 years old, and my son takes the hand of a man he has never met, and I watch Dominic Toretto, king of the Western Dominion, the thing that lives past the edge of every story that warns you not to look, close his eyes for 3 seconds and breathe. I press my hand flat against the corridor wall outside and try to remember how. He loves his son with something ancient and absolute. I can see it from here, and it is the only thing that matters, and it is the most dangerous thing in this room, and it is already too late for either of us. They came that evening. Not doctors. Not anything the hospital had seen before, though they moved through those corridors with the quiet authority of people who have never needed permission to be anywhere. 3 of them, carrying cases that looked medical but weren't. Not entirely. Dominic's healers. He'd said 4 words to someone on his phone while I was getting coffee from the machine down the hall, and by the time I came back, they were already in Diogo's room, speaking in low voices over equipment I couldn't name. I stood in the doorway and let myself be a stranger for a moment. Let myself watch without being watched back. Dominic stood at the window, his back to the room, his phone in his hand. He hadn't left. He hadn't eaten, hadn't sat, hadn't done anything that suggested he operated on the same biological requirements as the rest of us, which I reminded myself quietly he didn't. Not entirely. He'd stood at that window for 6 hours like a man who had decided the act of standing there was itself a form of protection. The healer who spoke to me first introduced herself as Renata. Small, precise, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a knot, the kind of woman who looks like she has been 45 years old for the last 4 centuries. She sat across from me in the family consultation room and laid it out without softening any of it, which I was grateful for. I have never needed softening. I have needed truth. What was growing in Diogo was not a mortal cancer. It was a war. His vampire cells, inherited from Dominic, dormant for the first 2 years of his life, beginning to wake as his body moved toward its own kind of maturity, were attacking his mortal ones. Not out of malice, out of dominance. 2 natures inside one small body, neither one willing to yield, and the battleground was his blood, his marrow, his breath. The mortal scans had caught the damage but not the cause. No human oncologist could have named this. No human medicine could touch it. The cure exists, Renata said. She said it plainly, the way you say something true that carries terrible weight. But it requires a rebalancing of his cellular dominance, a process that can only be initiated through vampire medicine, specific compounds, and sustained proximity to his sire line.
It takes time.
Weeks, possibly more. And it cannot be done here. I looked at the table between us. At my hands on the table. At the wedding ring I'd stopped wearing 18 months ago and hadn't replaced with anything, just that bare space on my finger that I sometimes touched without meaning to. Where? I said. She told me about the estate. 40 minutes west of Denver, into the foothills, where the city lights dissolved into dark and the dark felt older than it should. Fortified. Staffed. Every resource Dominic could mobilize, already in motion before I'd even said yes. I hadn't said yes. I said yes anyway. I didn't sign anything. There was nothing to sign. This was not a negotiation with paperwork. This was the moment you choose your child over every principle you built your independence on, and you do it without flinching because you are his mother, and there is no version of this where you choose anything else. I agreed to everything. I packed Diogo's bag with his Velcro sneakers and his stuffed bear and the small blanket he refused to sleep without, and I carried him out of that hospital without looking back at the life I'd made in Denver, the apartment, the routines, the careful, ordinary world I'd built at a deliberate distance from everything Dominic was. Distance, I had learned, was not protection. I was still learning what it cost. The estate was not what I expected, and exactly what I should have expected. Stone and glass set into the hillside like it had grown there, surrounded by trees that felt intentional rather than wild. The security was invisible until you looked for it. Then it was everywhere, unhurried and absolute. My room was on the second floor, Diogo's beside it, connected by a door I could leave open all night. I left it open all night. Within 4 days, Diogo's color came back. Small thing to say. Enormous thing to watch. The gray undertone that had been creeping into his skin for 2 months, the thing I'd told myself was tiredness, was the Colorado winter, was anything except what it was, began to lift. He sat up on his own on the third morning and asked for his bear, and then asked for breakfast, and then asked me to read the book. Mama, the one with the rabbit, read it again. I read it 4 times. I didn't cry until I was in the hallway with the door closed. I let myself feel hope. I knew it was dangerous. I felt it anyway because I am 38 years old and I have survived enough to know that hope is not stupidity. It is the most expensive thing you can carry, and sometimes you carry it anyway because the alternative is not surviving at all. Dominic was careful with me. Measured. He came to Diogo's room each morning and each evening, and I watched my son learn the particular gravity of his father, reaching for him, mimicking the way he sat, studying his face with that quiet intensity that now made complete and heartbreaking sense. 2 natures recognizing each other across 3 years of separation neither of them chose. He didn't touch me, didn't try. Kept every interaction precise and functional, the way a man keeps himself in check when he knows what losing it costs. I noticed the faces on the 9th day. 2 men at the base of the eastern tree line, standing too still in a way that had nothing to do with Dominic's security. Different posture, different patience. Watching the house with the specific attention of people cataloging rather than guarding. I stood at the window with my coffee going cold in my hands, and I watched them watch us. I didn't tell Dominic. I knew what he would do with that information. He would pull the walls tighter, push me further from the center, manage the threat the way he managed everything, efficiently and alone, with me safely outside the radius of any decision that mattered. I had been outside that radius before. I had left a marriage because of it. So I said nothing. I filed it away in the part of myself that was already moving, already calculating, already refusing to be the woman standing in the hallway while the door is closed. That silence was the first mistake.
I didn't know it yet, but I know it now.
There is a number I kept from my marriage the way you keep a fire extinguisher, stored somewhere you hope you never need, never quite able to throw it away because the day you do is the day the kitchen burns. I found it on the 12th day at the estate, standing in the bathroom at 2 a.m. with the tap running so the sound of my voice wouldn't carry through the walls. I'd written it in the back of a small notebook I'd carried since my first year with Dominic, not a diary, just a place for things I needed to remember and couldn't trust to my phone. Phone contacts can be found. Ink in a notebook you keep at the bottom of a winter coat pocket is just ink. Tristan D. Martel. 9 digits and a name, and the memory of a man I'd met exactly twice during my marriage. Once at a function Dominic had brought me to, once in a parking garage afterward when Tristan had appeared at my car window and said, very quietly, if you ever need a way out that doesn't go through him, use this. He hadn't waited for a response. He'd walked away before I could decide how to feel about it. I hadn't used it when I left Dominic. I'd left on my own terms, with my own plan, and I'd been proud of that. I'm still proud of it. I want to be clear about that because what I did next was not the same thing. What I did next came from a different place entirely, not strength, not strategy. Something lower and more animal than either of those. He answered on the 3rd ring. No greeting, just silence that meant he was listening. It's Keisha Gray, I said. Keisha Toretto, when you knew me.
A pause.
Then, I know who you are. We met 2 days later. Not in Denver, 40 minutes east, a diner off the interstate that looked like it had been built in 1987 and not meaningfully updated since. Tristan D. Martel was exactly as I remembered him. Compact, unremarkable to look at, the kind of man a room forgets the moment he leaves it. That was the point of him. He sat across from me with black coffee and both hands visible on the table, which I recognized as a deliberate gesture of transparency, and I appreciated it the way you appreciate honesty from someone you know is also operating an agenda. He was not heroic. I want to say that clearly because this story has enough places where I soften the truth to make it livable, and this is not one of them. Tristan D. Martel was a mortal vampire hunter with a specific grudge against the rival courts that predated my marriage by a decade. His interest in helping me was not compassion. It was convergence. We wanted the same outcome for entirely different reasons, and he was practical enough to build something from that. He laid it out plainly. He'd been tracking the rival courts' movements into Colorado for 8 months. He knew their key figures, their preferred locations, their patterns of acquisition. If Diogo was taken, when his word, not mine, and the way he said it landed in my chest like something cold, Tristan would know within hours where he'd been moved. What he needed from me was simpler and more terrible. Dominic's defensive rotations. The patterns in his security, when it shifted, where the gaps were, how his men communicated. Not to breach them, to map them against what the rival courts were watching, to understand what they were looking for, and when they planned to move. I sat with that for a long moment, looked at the coffee I hadn't touched, looked at the window, the interstate beyond it, the ordinary world of trucks and rest stops, and people who would never have this conversation. I told myself I was being strategic. I knew the difference between strategic and desperate. I have always known that difference. It's the kind of thing you learn when you've had to rebuild yourself from nothing more than once, when you've sat in new apartments in new cities and understood that the only person who is definitely going to protect you is you. Strategic feels like a plan. Desperate feels like what you do when the plan is running out. This was desperate. I knew it in the way you know things you can't say out loud, because saying them makes them real. But Diogo's color was coming back. Diogo was asking for his book and his breakfast and laughing at things that weren't funny because he was 3, and everything was funny at 3. And those men were still appearing at the edges of the property, different faces now, rotating, which meant they were organized and patient and waiting for something specific. Dominic was moving his security in response to threats I wasn't being told about. I could see it in the small adjustments, the additional men on the western perimeter, the change in Renata's hours, the way Dominic's phone calls had started happening in rooms where I wasn't. The walls were rising again, quiet and inevitable, and I recognized them because I had lived inside them before. I would not wait behind walls while my son was in danger. I had done that. I had sat in beautiful rooms and been protected and managed and kept outside the radius of every decision that mattered. I had left a marriage because of it. So I looked at Tristan D. Martel across that laminate table in that forgettable diner, and I told him what he needed. He told me to stay close to my phone. I drove back to the estate in the early afternoon, Diogo's voice on a voice memo playing through my car speakers, him telling me about a dream he'd had, something about a blue dog and a very tall tree, and I listened to my son's voice and I told myself this would keep him safe. I was so certain. That's the part that stays with me. Not the choice itself, the certainty. The absolute, loving, devastating certainty that I was doing the right thing. I found the research at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, the way you find things that change everything, not looking for them, half asleep, following a thread that had no reason to lead anywhere. Dr. Noel Abra, mortal immunologist, University of Colorado, published paper on hybrid cellular conflict in non-human biological systems 18 months ago in a journal so obscure it had fewer than 200 citations. But those 200 citations, I read every one of them. I read them in the dark with Diogo asleep on the other side of the wall and Dominic somewhere in the East Wing doing whatever Dominic did at 3 a.m., which I had stopped asking about. The paper read like a man who knew something he shouldn't, writing carefully around the edges of what he actually understood. The language was academic, but the conclusions were too precise, too specific. The kind of specific that comes from data, not theory. I told myself it was one consultation, 1 hour, one specialist, one additional perspective that Renata and Dominic's healers might have missed or dismissed because it came from the mortal side of medicine. Diogo was both. His war was being fought on both fronts. It seemed not just reasonable but responsible to pursue every available intelligence. I told myself this at 3 a.m. I told myself this again at 7 a.m. when I called Dr. Abra's office. I was still telling myself this 4 days later when I put Diogo in his car seat with his bear buckled beside him. The way he insisted, "Bear needs a seatbelt too, mama," and pulled out of the estate behind a security detail of 2 that Dominic had assigned for what I described as a routine follow-up. I had not told Dominic where we were going. I had not told him about Dr. Abra. I had calculated, with the specific precision of a woman who has learned to move quietly around a powerful man's authority, that asking permission was the same as being told no, and being told no meant Diogo stayed inside the radius of one school of medicine, when 2 is better. That calculation was the last clear thought I had for a very long time. The parking structure at Denver Children's was 3 levels, fluorescent lit, the kind of ordinary institutional space that exists in thousands of cities, unremarkable in every way. We were on level 2. The appointment was 12 minutes away. Diogo was holding his bear and telling me about something one of Renata's assistants had shown him, a card trick he'd been practicing it all week. He wanted to show the doctor. "Mama, watch, pick a card." I was watching him. I want that on record somewhere. I was watching my son. The 2 men from Dominic's detail went down first. I didn't understand what I was seeing for the first 2 seconds. Movement in my peripheral vision, a sound that wasn't quite right, and then both of them were down, and there were 4 people I had never seen before moving with a coordination that was not human in its efficiency. Not frantic. Not loud. Organized, the way a thing is organized when it has been rehearsed. Someone put a hand at my throat. Not choking, pinning. pressing me back against the concrete pillar with a force I could not move against no matter how my body threw itself forward. And I threw myself forward. I want you to understand that. I clawed and kicked and made every sound a person makes when something is being taken from them, and they know it and cannot stop it. Diogo looked at me from 4 steps away. His bear was still in his hand. His face, 3 years old, my boy's face, held an expression I had never seen on it before, and pray I never see again. Not fear. Something older than fear. Recognition, maybe. The same look he'd turned on that candle flame 2 years ago. Some part of him knowing, in whatever way a 3-year-old knows anything, that something had found him that had always been coming. Mama. Just that. Just my name in his voice. And then they were gone. 40 feet to a black vehicle I hadn't seen arrive.
Doors.
Engine.
Gone.
4 minutes. Tristan had told me that's how long these extractions take when they're planned properly. I had filed that information away. I had not understood until this moment that I was filing it because I was always going to need it. The hand in my throat released. I hit the concrete on my knees. I don't remember falling. Dominic arrived 19 minutes later. I know the exact number because I counted. I sat on that parking structure floor, and I counted seconds because it was the only thing my mind could do that wasn't the look on Diogo's face, and I counted all the way to 19 minutes, and then the door to the stairwell opened, and he was there. He looked at the 2 men from his detail, still down, already being assessed by people who had arrived with him. He looked at the tire marks on the concrete. He looked at the security footage panel on the wall, dark. They'd cut the feed. Of course they'd cut the feed. And then he looked at me. I have seen Dominic furious. I know what that looks like, the particular stillness of it. The way cold is actually the highest temperature he reaches. I was prepared for fury. I had been preparing for it on the floor of that parking structure for 19 minutes. What was on his face was not fury.
It was quieter than that.
Permanent in a way that fury never is. He looked at me the way you look at a door that is just closed and you know with complete certainty that you will not be able to open it again. He did not ask me why I'd come here without telling him.
He did not ask me anything.
He crossed the space between us, crouched down, and checked whether I was physically hurt with hands that were efficient and impersonal. Then he stood, turned away, and began giving instructions to the men around him in a voice I couldn't hear. That was the moment I understood what I had done. Not the choice, the cost. The choice had been mine, made from love, made from the absolute conviction that I knew better. The cost was this: Dominic Toretto, who had been learning to let me stand beside him again, closed. Not in anger, in something that looked, from the outside, exactly like grief arriving before its time. And Diogo was gone, and the bear was on the concrete where he'd dropped it, and I picked it up and held it against my chest and rocked on my knees in a parking structure in Denver, while the man I had broken everything to protect our son stood 20 feet away, already somewhere I could not follow. Tristan called at 4 a.m., 41 hours after the parking structure. I was not asleep. I hadn't slept. I'd been sitting in the estate's east corridor outside the room Dominic had assigned me. Back inside the walls, back under the protection I'd circumvented, except now the walls felt different. Not like a cage. Like a verdict. Dominic had not spoken to me beyond operational necessity since the parking structure. He moved through the same spaces I did like a man who had already begun the work of erasing a presence from his daily life. Methodical. Quiet. The way you pack up a room you're never going back to. Tristan's voice when I answered was the same as always, low, precise, stripped of anything that wasn't information. He had a location. Industrial complex south of Denver. A facility the rival court had used before, abandoned on paper, active in ways that paper didn't reflect. His team was moving at first light. 6 hours. I said I was coming. He said no. I said I was coming anyway, and something in my voice must have told him that this was not a negotiation and had never been one, because after a silence that lasted exactly long enough for him to calculate whether stopping me was worth the effort, he gave me an address and told me to be there in 2 hours. I did not tell Dominic.
I know how that sounds.
I know how every choice in this story sounds from the outside, where the ending is already visible. From the inside, at 4 a.m., holding my son's bear against my chest in a corridor that smelled like cedar and stone, it felt like the only thing a mother could do. Go toward him, whatever it cost, whatever door it closed, whatever version of myself I had to burn through to get there, go toward him. That is the only law that has ever governed me completely. Tristan's team was 7 people in 2 vehicles, none of them introducing themselves, all of them moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before and intended to survive doing it again. I sat in the back and held Diogo's bear in my lap and did not speak.
No one asked me to.
The facility appeared out of the pre-dawn dark like a bruise on the landscape. Low buildings, chain link, the particular desolation of a place that wants to look forgotten. Tristan went through the entry point first. What followed was fast and brutal in the way that real violence always is. Not cinematic, not choreographed, just sudden and loud, and then suddenly quiet again. The silence after worse than the noise. We moved through corridors that smelled like cold concrete and something older and darker beneath it, and I kept my hand on the wall because my legs were not entirely reliable, and I told myself he's here. He's here. We're going to find him, and he's going to reach for me the way he always does, and I'm going to carry him out of this building, and I'm never, not for one single moment for the rest of my life, going to let go. The room at the end of the eastern corridor was small. A cot. A single light. A stuffed rabbit someone had given him that wasn't his, that he wouldn't have wanted, and I registered that detail with a grief so specific it had its own shape, that he'd been here long enough for someone to give him a toy, that he'd been alone long enough to need one. He was on the cot. Very small. Very still. I knew before I crossed the room. I knew in my body before my mind would form the words, the way you know things that are too large for thought, that have to enter through the skin first. The cancer and the captivity and the fear of being 3 years old and alone in the dark, all of it together had been more than one small body could hold. Renata had told me he needed stability, consistency, the specific environment of the estate to maintain what the treatment had started. I had removed him from that environment. I had done that.
Me.
He looked like he was sleeping. I sat on the edge of the cot, and I gathered him into my arms. All of him, all 32 pounds of my son, his Velcro sneakers and his soft hair and the warmth that was already beginning to leave him, and I held him against my chest the way I had held him every night of his life, and I pressed my mouth to his forehead, and I said his name. Once. Then again. Then I stopped saying it because saying it into that silence was a thing I understood I could not survive doing a third time. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard the door. I didn't look up. I knew. The air in the room changed the way it always did. That specific drop in temperature, that shift in atmospheric weight that had always announced him before the footsteps did. Dominic had come from the other side. His own team, his own intelligence, the same location reached by a different road. He hadn't known about Tristan. He hadn't known I was here. He stepped through that doorway expecting to find his son alive, and he found this instead. He saw Diogo first. Just looked at him, in my arms, for a long moment that remade the shape of the room. Then he looked at me. I have no words for what was on his face. I have tried to find them in every sleepless hour since, and I cannot. It was not anger. It was not blame, not yet, maybe not ever out loud, but we both knew what I had done, and we both knew the chain of it, link by link, my decisions, my certainty, my love that had moved wrong at every critical turn. What was on his face was the look of a man watching the last door close. He stood there for a long time. Long enough that I thought he might speak. Long enough that I thought maybe we could survive this together, that grief shared might be grief halved, that two people destroyed by the same loss might hold each other up in the rubble. Then he turned and walked out of the room. And something in the air changed. Final, like a seal pressed into wax. Like the last page of a thing being turned. I sat in that concrete room with my son in my arms, and I understood, somewhere past words, past thought, in the oldest and most animal part of me, that I would not come back from this hole. That the woman who had driven to that diner, who had made that call at 4 a.m., who had loved her son so completely and so catastrophically, she was already gone. What was left would have to figure out how to keep breathing. That was all. Just breathing. One and then the next, and then the one after that, in a room that was going to be ash by morning, holding what I could not keep and could not let go. I don't know what day it is. I know it's morning because there's light coming through the curtains. I know it's Denver because I can hear the specific quality of traffic on the street below. I've lived in this city long enough that the sound of it is familiar the way breathing is familiar, something your body does without requiring your attention. Beyond that, the details get soft. The date. The month. How many mornings have started this way, with me sitting in this chair by the window, Diogo's bear in my lap, the light moving across the floor while I watch it like it has something to tell me. It doesn't. It never does. But I keep watching anyway. Renata came once, 3 weeks after. I think it was 3 weeks. She sat across from me and spoke carefully about grief, about what the body does when the mind cannot process the scale of what it's carrying. She used clinical language because that was the only language she had, and I listened to her the way you listen to weather reports for a country you no longer live in. Relevant to someone.
Not to me.
She left her number on the kitchen counter, and I haven't moved it, and I haven't called it, and some mornings I look at it from across the room and think I should, and then the thought dissolves before I can act on it. Dominic is somewhere in the city. I know this the way you know things about weather, not from direct information from the atmosphere. From the quality of silence that comes from certain parts of Denver after dark. From the way Tristan called me once, 2 weeks ago, his voice stripped of its usual precision for the first time since I'd known him, and said only, "Stay inside tonight. Don't open the door for anything." His voice had something in it I hadn't heard before.
Fear.
I've heard what they call him now. The underground has a word for what Dominic has become, moving through this city in the dark. The Ripper. I won't describe what that means. Some things, if I put language around them, become more real than I can hold, and I am already holding more than I can hold. What I know is this. He is looking for something in those streets that he is never going to find. I know because I am doing the same thing, just more quietly. He goes out into the dark and tries to undo what cannot be undone. I sit in this chair and do the same thing. We are still, in our destruction, exactly alike. There are children Diogo's age in this city who are not safe because of what I set in motion. I know that. I carry it. I add it to everything else I carry, and I don't put it down because I don't deserve to put it down, and that thought is one of the clearer ones I have most days, which tells you something about the state of the rest of them. I lost Tuesday last week. Not lost it the way you lose an afternoon. Lost it entirely. Went to sleep Monday night and woke what I thought was the next morning, and my neighbor Fernanda knocked on my door and asked if I was all right. She hadn't seen me in 2 days. Was everything okay? I told her everything was fine. I told her Diogo was napping. I closed the door before I understood what I'd said. I stood in the hallway for a long time after that. Tristan came on a Thursday. I remember it was Thursday because the light was the particular flat gray that Denver gets on winter Thursdays, that specific combination of cloud cover and cold that I associate now with loss. Everything in this city does now. Every kind of weather has become a different texture of the same thing. He knocked and I opened the door because I recognized the knock and I wasn't afraid of him, which is its own strange fact given everything. He looked at me for a moment before he spoke. The look of a man revising what he'd planned to say. He came inside, sat down. He tried. I want to give him that. It matters to give it to him. He is not a man built for this kind of conversation, and he tried anyway. He spoke carefully about what had happened, about the chain of it, about responsibility distributed across multiple decisions made by multiple people. He was trying to tell me it wasn't only mine to carry. He was trying to offer me something that looked like absolution from the outside. I heard him. I understood every word. I watched his mouth move, and I thought about the way Diogo used to mispronounce Thursday. Thursday. Every week, Thursday, and I'd correct him gently, and he'd try again, and get it slightly wrong a different way, and we'd both end up laughing, him not sure why, just laughing because I was laughing, that gorgeous, uncomplicated mirror that children hold up to the people who love them. Tristan left. He paused at the door and looked back at me, and I saw in his face that he understood. He was leaving me somewhere he couldn't follow. That whatever he'd come to offer hadn't reached me. That there was no version of this conversation that was going to work because I was not quite all here anymore, and we both knew it. He closed the door quietly. That quietness was its own kind of kindness. I am in Diogo's room now. I don't always know how I get here. I'll be in the kitchen or the hallway, and then I'll be here, sitting in the small chair by his window, the one I used to sit in to read to him, the book with the rabbit, the one he made me read 4 times in a row. His things are exactly where he left them. I haven't moved anything. I won't move anything. The Velcro sneakers are by the door. His blanket is folded on the bed with the specific imprecision of a 3-year-old who insisted on doing it himself. Denver is below the window. Somewhere in it, Dominic is becoming something I can't save him from, hunting through the dark for a way back to a morning that already happened and cannot be recovered. We're both lost. We just got lost in different directions. The bear is in my lap. I smooth its ear. The left one. The one Diogo used to rub between his fingers when he was tired. The fur worn thin in that one spot from 3 years of small hands needing comfort. I smooth it, and I look at his blanket, and I look at his shoes, and I think about how I need to go check on him. He's been quiet too long. He's never quiet this long unless he's sleeping, and if he's sleeping I should check. I should just go look, make sure he's covered, make sure he's warm. I'll be right back. I'll just be a minute. I just need 1 minute and then I'll be right there. I just need 1 minute. And then I'll be right there. If this reached somewhere in you that doesn't have a name yet, if you felt something in the story that you've never quite been able to say out loud, you're not alone in that. There are other stories here. Other women. Other costs. Other loves that were real and were not enough and mattered anyway. They're here if you stay. Subscribe so they don't disappear on you. Some of us need to know we're not the only ones who have loved like this. This is one of those places.